Welcome to Grad Chat by PhD Balance, where we talk about topics of grad school that are beyond our academic research and that may be more difficult to talk about in our day-to-day lives. I'm your host, Linda Corcoran, and I'm a research master's student in food science at University College Cork. As you may have noticed, I am not Phelan, our usual host. And if you missed it, Grad Chat is getting a bit of a revamp. We are going to have some new hosts, and you can check the PhD Balance website for more information. But today our topic is, I did click, am I not showing up yet?
Not yet. I'm not seeing you yet.
A bit of a technical mishap, but our topic today is talking about transitions, and I am very excited to welcome our guest, Fátima. Fátima completed a PhD in biomedical sciences before transitioning disciplines to do a postdoc researching ECR training spaces and developing mentor training interventions. And she's currently working as a research assistant at the University of Wisconsin-Madison in the same area. But changing disciplines is not the only transition that has happened in Fátima's life. There's been several, and we are going to talk about some and all of them. So welcome, Fátima. Do you want to tell us a bit about yourself?
Sure. Thanks for that introduction. It's been a little bit of a wild week for me in that it was the end of Ramadan, all the stuff happening with the Israeli violence on Palestine and submitting a grant and then personal stuff having to do with transition. So if I'm a little bit scatterbrained, feel free to bring me back into the topic of conversation. As you mentioned, my name is Fátima. I use she, her, and he, him pronouns. You can feel free to use those interchangeably. And I currently love what I do in academia. That wasn't always the case. I think like a lot of folks, I struggled with the way that academia is structured, the culture in academia, the way that early career researchers are trained, just everything to do with this sort of weird blend of neolib capitalistic, white supremacist culture that claims itself to be objective, scientific, inquiry-based, when it is really heavily influenced by culture. And so, yeah, as you mentioned, I mean, my whole life has been, to some degree, a journey in transitioning in different aspects of my life. I will say that, anything that I say today is just, a factor of my own experience and not really meant in any way to encompass what is the trans experience, the queer experience, the Mexican-American experience. But I moved to the US when I was 9. I speak more than one language. My two major ones, fluent ones, are English and Spanish. I am a creative writer. I did an undergrad degree in English as well as biomedical engineering. So I do some creative writing on the side, mostly magic realism, sometimes some fantasy as well. And I am someone who is very spiritual, faith-based, and also very scientific. And so I always feel like I found myself the perfect metaphor, I think, for my entire life. I should also mention, I'm also autistic, since we're talking mental health as well. And we're going to talk a little bit about diagnoses as well. I've always felt like I'm at this border and I'm straddling it, right? I've got one foot on one side of it and another foot on the other. And I'm either moving back and forth myself to interact with folks on either side. I am bridging people forth from one side to the other, or I am in some way translating for people. I like that about me. I've only come into that very recently, I would say in the last 5 to 10 years of my life, as I've sort of discovered myself and tried to break free from a lot of the things that people told me I should be rather than who I knew myself to be. With regards to what I do in my career and how that's applicable to what we're talking about today, I got very interested in grad school around training environments. started to do a lot of sort of on the side research on sort of pop psych, educational psychology, organizational psychology, really looking at what the best practices were for training people, for running organizations, very quickly realizing that grad school wasn't doing that for us. At least the majority of grad schools weren't doing that for us. And then got involved with advocacy, first with my own blog, then through Future of Research, which I'm now the president of, which led into my postdoc and my current job, which, as you mentioned, it's really, really cool because I get to work with some of the experts in the field of mentoring and early career research training environments. It means I get to use my research to inform my advocacy, which in turn informs my research. And the same goes for, all of the curricula that we implement and develop. So I've gotten to develop curricula for mentor training that focuses on well-being. I've gotten to develop curricula specifically for postdocs. I've gotten to work with some really cool people, both through Future of Research and at UW-Madison. So right now, I found myself really privileged and blessed to be in such a supportive environment with such a great team that really walks the walk. And I realize I just threw a lot at you there. So I'm happy to pick at any and all of those threads if you are so inclined. I know we already have some questions from the audience. So I really would love to, just hear where you're at with all of that.
I know. That was so many different things I could touch on there. All of it amazing. I suppose personally, I resonated more with the feeling like you're at a crossroads and you're between two things, especially because I'm also diagnosed as autistic and both of us were diagnosed as adults. So that can be, it's something that comes up commonly, I think, for autistic adults. But I guess before we get on to all of that, one thing we did want to kind of address for some people who may not be used to it is, do you want to talk about your perspective of using both the binary pronouns of she, her, and he, him? Because many people will not have come across it before.
Yeah. Oh, this is such a rich topic. I could spend an entire hour on this. I think the place really to start is for a long time, I've known myself to be bigendered, and for that to come from a very spiritual place, being a very spiritual person. I still have yet to untangle whether it is because I grew up and developed in a country that speaks a language that is very binarily gendered, or if it is something that is intrinsic to who I am and my identity. In some ways, it doesn't necessarily matter as much right now. I've gotten through the angst of trying to pick at why it is that I feel this way. But when I started to explore gender fluidity, gender fuckery, as it were, if you'll excuse the language. I mean, it is it's an actual term that's used to describe sort of the way that some people approach gender. When I started to explore that about, let's see, it must have been 2016. So about 5 or 6 years ago now, feeling really at this crossroads, as you mentioned. And before I was even exposed, really, because I was so sheltered and grew up in such a traditional household, to anything queer or non-binary. And I started to explore all of these things. Non-binary never really felt like it fit for me because it felt very much agendered as opposed to bigendered, which is how I felt. I later learned more about non-binariness and it being sort of this umbrella term to encompass a lot of people's experiences with gender that falls outside of or encompasses all aspects of the gender binary. But I had a friend, I remember this moment specifically. We were at karaoke night celebrating a friend's birthday. And I had a friend ask me if I wanted her to start referring to me with they, them pronouns. And I had a very visceral gut reaction. My stomach just did this like, and for the longest time, I thought, oh gosh, it must be because I can't even start to fathom how that would work in Spanish, even though in Spanish, non-binary people that like the non-gendered pronouns use the E at the end for ele, right? And for adjectives. But for the longest time, just that did not feel like my experience. And so there were a couple of times I've read some wonderful, wonderful queer and trans literature where people play around with pronouns in a way that that encompasses both. So, the S/HE I was using for some time because I really, really like that. Until I found out that people just understood that to mean that I was using she and she, her, and he, him interchangeably, which I kind of do, but I was also pronouncing that as he. And then there's all the neo pronouns, right? And so I've settled for this reality of like in cis spaces, I want people to recognize that my transition, my experience, my life, it's not that of a binary trans woman necessarily. It's not that of a cis man. It's very encompassing of this sort of fluidity and or existence in the middle of a binary, if such a binary were to exist. And for the longest time, I was ashamed or embarrassed of that because I didn't want to assert myself in that way and give trans exclusionists or transphobic folks sort of ways to weaponize my existence or to use my existence as ammunition for the erasure of the binary trans women and binary trans men's existence and their sort of, that they are who they are, and that, trans men are men and trans women are women. I didn't want people to say, oh, well, look at her, she's both man and woman. So clearly that means that every trans person is not who they say that they are, right? So that's sort of the long way of saying, she, her, he, him is my way of both throwing people off in terms of their assumptions that they're making about me, as well as asserting who I am myself and my experience. In Spanish, it works beautifully for me, way better than the E pronouns and adjectives do. I love it when I'm talking to friends and family and both they and I refer to myself using O and A adjectives interchangeably in sentences. I feel like that really captures me. Sometimes my sadness feels very feminine and sometimes my sadness feels very masculine, in the same way that sometimes my anger feels very masculine and very feminine in Spanish. So my state of being is very gendered in Spanish by the very virtue of the language being gendered, and therefore me being able to express myself in twice as many ways as I used to when I was using only one or the other. In queer spaces, I play around with a lot of neopronouns. Currently, I use CSE and then M, EM, and ERS, ERS for the possessive and the objective cases. I think that's right. Yes, my high school English teacher. I don't know if they would be proud of me or not, and that at least I've got my grammar right. I think that's the objective case. Yes. Because that feels cool and great and safe to explore. I still don't feel comfortable using neopronouns in non-queer and non-cis spaces. So those are the pronouns. So yeah, so for folks who address me with she, her, great, fantastic. If you address me as he, him, because you're assuming that I'm a cis man, not fantastic. You should check yourself. But also I don't need 1,001 apologies and you very visibly trying to make the she, her clear after you've screwed up with the he, him, because those are my pronouns. I do use he, him pronouns on a regular basis to refer to my past selves, to refer to my current self. So yeah.
Thanks so much for covering all that.
That was a lot.
Yeah, no, I completely get it. I've been playing around with pronouns myself for maybe about a year now, and it can be very complicated when you're trying to figure out what suits you and what doesn't, and why you want to keep things. A lot of people say to me, I identify as non-binary. Why are you keeping the she? And I'm questioning myself. I'm like, do I want to appear and please all of these transphobic people and just fly under the radar, or am I okay with the she? And that's definitely a lot of conversation that I've had with myself trying to figure that out. I'm not not 100% whether I like it or not at the moment, but I'm sticking with it. We'll see if it stays.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the most wonderful things that I've gotten to experience in trans spaces, and I don't know if the same experience is for you, but at least one of the things that I've noticed, particularly with non-binary folk, is that a lot of times the gender as perceived by others and the gender as perceived by self doesn't need to align necessarily, i.e. the way that we move through the world and others perceive us does not need to be the same as the way that we perceive ourselves in isolation and in complete privacy. And those sometimes align, and that's beautiful. Sometimes they don't, and that's just as beautiful. And I think as long as people respect how we're walking through the world, right, and who we are, then that's great. But I, like you, I mean, and I was very much in denial, and just talking to my therapist about being trans. I remember the stress that it would be walking into a room and having everyone give their pronouns and say their pronouns. I would be like, oh, I haven't even begun to scratch that surface, and here I am, expected to tell you definitively which pronouns I'm using. Oh gosh. So anyway, yeah, they are. I think they are very, very important, and they are also a tool, right? A thing we use in speech and in language, and they are quirky to each language, some of which are very, very gendered, others which are not at all. So.
Yeah, no, definitely. I know people are getting more aware of pronouns, and that's great. Not so much of the neo pronouns; they're very queer-only spaces, not accepted. But I guess we have so much to talk about that we should probably move on to another topic because there's a lot to talk about with transitions, with even we could talk for a year about transgender experiences, yours, mine, general misconceptions in the cis world of academia. But I guess before we leave it, what is your experience in specifically academia and in the US of dealing with your transition in academia? I know it can be a varied experience for people. What is yours like?
Yeah, I mean, and I'd love to hear from you as well if you're open to sharing. I've been very, very, very privileged. In the sense that I started to transition openly, socially, very, very recently, and did so within a context and a team that has been super, super, super supportive. The biggest, hurdle that I've come across has been, the name changes on past papers and trying to get the university to recognize that, I also decided to change my last name, and that was valid, even though I haven't done it legally, which is still an ongoing thing. So I've been very, very privileged and lucky to be in a supportive environment and with a good team. Had I transitioned in grad school, and that's one of the reasons why I, remained closeted and didn't transition in grad school, among other things, is I wouldn't have had the same experience. I also, to some degree, don't necessarily, I'm not attached to the tenure track career. And so there is less of a concern that, people might not, I mean, I still think about it when I apply for grants, are people going to see that I'm trans because I'm openly trans, and in my applications, I'll talk about that. It's part of my experience. And will I get dinged on a grant application? That's the extent of, for me, the experience, beyond having just a wonderful team that really supports me, that gets it. I came out to my supervisors, 2 or 3 months before I started hormone replacement therapy, and they've been supportive since day one. So yeah, I'm very lucky and very privileged in that sense.
That's great. We always like to hear about supportive advisors, supportive environments, whatever you have. Yeah, I definitely get it. I know the replacement of names on papers is a big area of contention between trans academics, trans grad students, and academic publishers. It's unfortunately something that has been going on a while.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and definitely, I'm always happy when I hear that people have good environments, whether it's to do with being trans, whether it's to do with having disabilities or neurodiversities or anything, basically, just being themselves. It's important, and unfortunately, it's not common enough in academia. There's a lot of people. Like I've had references written for me by people that I have come out to as non-binary, and they still refer to me as a woman, and I'm like, no, please stop.
Yeah.
But the main thing is that people try, and that sounds very basic, but that is all we're looking for.
It's a very low bar. Unfortunately, a lot of people still fail to jump over it or reach it, as it were.
Absolutely. It absolutely is. And I know you said you were super open about being trans on grant applications, which can be a very difficult decision for people. I don't think I've ever been open on a grant application or any type of application. I have been open about disabilities and autism, though. And that's also a big decision for people. And I know you mentioned, well, to me, that you went through an autism diagnosis 2 years ago, did you say?
No, it's been 4 now.
Wow.
Yeah, time flies.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. It's totally fine.
Do you want to talk a bit about that and how that happened and how it came about, I guess?
Yeah, so I think it's the cliche about autistic adults, and that you always know that something is off, and people, even though they're well-meaning, end up gaslighting you about your own experience, right? In the sense that I always knew I was uncomfortable socially. I thought either everyone got it and I didn't, and I would just pretend to get it, or that maybe my experience was just wrong and I wasn't, experiencing what I was experiencing, which is wild for someone to think like the things that I'm experiencing aren't real, or they don't exist, or they're not valid, right? But I had very well-meaning relatives who said, "Oh, you're not weird, you're normal, and you're great, and you're, all these things," which is like, without even getting into the problematic, use of the word normal. But so I think, I grew up as a young kid, struggling a lot in school, behaviorally, socially. I'm pretty sure I have ADHD as well. That didn't get diagnosed when I was going through the autism diagnosis, because autism was the focus, but there's a lot of occurrences with that. And so I really struggled, and in Mexico we didn't catch it. And then when we moved to the US, I got put in a gifted program, and because that seemed to get my attention, and I'm sort of on the high IQ end of what can come with being autistic. I don't have an intellectual disability, which we don't have time to get into the problems of functioning labels and the harm that they do to our community as well. But the reality is that, and IQ is also super problematic. But all of that to say, I have a really, really good memory, to the point where it was almost photographic when I was in school. So what would really happen is, I would be in class, whether in high school or in college, and I would be writing a fantasy novel. That's what I spent most of my time doing in high school and grad school. In class was either reading books when the teacher wasn't looking. This was pre-cell phones, or at least me pre-having cell phones, playing games on my calculator, or writing fantasy novels. And yet I could, without studying, because I would play fantasy video games when I got home or write some more fantasy novels, without studying, I would then, show up to the test, be the first one out of that test and get an A. So I never really understood what it was to like really, really struggle in school until I started grad school. And what happened was in grad school, it's not at all about memorization. It's not at all about problem solving in the sense that, I mean, it is problem solving, but it's by doing and by being didactic and by being really consistent and having your own schedule. I was used to like the teacher giving me the homework, me having all the assignments laid out on a syllabus, me going in, taking the test, getting the grade and leaving, right? And that was my experience. And so my lack of executive functioning, coupled with my struggles in romantic relationships at a time in my life when that started to become more important, right? I was in my mid-20s. And I wanted to focus on that a little bit more, coupled with the fact that I was moving a lot. So when I graduated undergrad, I moved to Tanzania. I was there for 9 months. Then I moved to the UK. I was there for 2 years. Then I moved to DC, and I was there for 2 years. And now I'm here in Wisconsin. I've been here for 2 years. So it's a 2-2-2 pattern. That left me really burnt out emotionally, on top of everything that was happening with grad school, right? And grad school can be a struggle for anyone emotionally with everything that's going on. But when I was hitting the lowest of my lows in terms of emotional health, hitting rock bottom, just a content warning for your viewers with regards to suicidal ideation. If anyone has issues with that, I'll give them a sec to mute their microphones. I struggled with that. Not their microphones, their speakers. I struggled with that. I got to a really, really, really low point in my mental health, even as I was doing advocacy for others' mental health. And I was struggling because the therapist that I was going to and the therapy that I was attending was addressing a lot of other issues, which were great, but they weren't addressing the main issue, which was I was an autistic person, right? Trying to fit myself into a neurotypical mold, and or having my neurotypical, my closest relationships, in particular, my romantic partnerships, trying to fit within the context of a neurotypical relationship and not giving me the space to address the needs that I, as an autistic person, needed in a romantic relationship in terms of space, in terms of communication, in terms of just assumptions of what was assumed and expected of me in the relationship. And I very, very luckily have an aunt who is a therapist, and at the time was, she still does, her specialty was autism spectrum clients in Mexico. She works at an autism clinic in Mexico. And she said to me, I've known you your whole life, and things didn't click because I hadn't learned, or I wasn't studying, or this wasn't my expertise. Now that I'm working with all of these autistic clients, maybe you should check it out. And the way that I describe it, it was very similar to when Bastian in The Neverending Story is reading the book of The Neverending Story and is reading about himself, and he has this moment of like, oh shit, that's me that this book is referring to, and like the wind flies through the room, and like the wolf head comes down and scares the crap out of him when he's in that old schoolhouse. I had a very similar moment of reading about these experiences that autistic men and women were experiencing, and going, oh shit, that's me, yo. Like that's my whole life and all the struggles that I've had. And so that was super, super interesting. And then the diagnosis obviously came with the internalized the ableism that I had internalized and working through that in therapy, but also the ableism that my entire family had, and them trying again, very well-meaning, to be like, oh, you don't need to let the label define you. This isn't who you are, blah, blah, blah. And it was like, no, this is who I am. The diagnosis is not a label, it's an identity that helps me, develop tools to move around a world where most people don't have a brain like mine. I actually love this diagnosis, and I'm very lucky and privileged to have gotten it. So please take a step back and, deal with your own insecurities. and your own issues before you come tell me what does or does not define me. And it's been great since then. My getting an autism spectrum diagnosis allowed me to feel more comfortable in exploring my gender and my sexuality. I did the self-diagnosis test that a lot of us do online and scored way higher on the woman's test than on the man's test. That was a light bulb moment. It was like, huh, I guess I'm an autistic woman. Interesting.
Yeah, definitely relate to absolutely everything you said, pretty much all of it. You know, even from the start, you know, being like, I kind of knew something was there, wasn't sure what it was, knew it was like. But yeah, it was kind of the same as you. I was in therapy before I got diagnosed with autism, and they were like, oh, it's just depression, and maybe you're a bit sensitive, and anxiety, lots of anxiety. You just need to deal with that. And then, like, getting the autism diagnosis, they're like, you're a person with autism.
Oh,
And
gosh.
yeah. And you
Just
don't need
back
to
up my
let it
autism in
define
a
you.
suitcase, yeah, and take it with me wherever I go.
Oh, it's yeah, and they're like, you don't need to let it define you. It's fine. You've got this far in life without getting diagnosed, so you're obviously fine. Like, you're this high functioning. And again, to anyone watching, please don't ever call someone high functioning. Don't do it.
Yeah, and yeah, and to the viewers, there's a lot of literature out there and sort of texts and blog posts from both autistic people as well as autistic therapists, as well as parents who are autistic, who have autistic children, as to the harm that we do to people with the idea of functionality or functioning, as opposed to a baseline, without recognizing the constellation of things that come with being autistic, one of which is intellectual disability and nonverbality. And those are just as important parts of being autistic and the autistic community, right? And those members are there. And I only mention that because I know a lot of folks who like to advocate against the concept of neurodiversity claim that the concept of neurodiversity erases those folks who can't speak for themselves verbally, even though they do communicate in different ways, and who have intellectual disability, because we have a lot of really amazing and great self-advocates that I've learned from, that I love and respect as my autistic brethren, and who, you know, are just as valid and an important part of our community, you know, who have intellectual disability or who are nonverbal. So yeah.
Absolutely. And it's so important to get involved, I think, even in the autistic community as a whole, because not only do you learn so much more about the community and about autism and being autistic in the world, you also, it does help you learn more about yourself and why you react to things in certain ways. And also, just in general, it's a big thing for getting over your internalized ableism.
Yeah. Both the recognition that we're not a monolith, and that, you know, for a lot of us who got our diagnoses as adults, because we've spent our whole lives passing, right, because of that internalized ableism and trying to pass for neurotypical, that there's a lot about ourselves that we rejected from when we were kids. I did some really, really powerful sort of meditation and sort of psychosomatic work earlier in my life, and there was a part of me where I came to I had a conversation with little me, and little me was angry as hell. Young kid me was angry as hell at myself, because I, like the other kids at school, said to that part of me, you're not cool, you're weird, you're strange, you can't come out and play, you have to stay hidden, you're not worthy, you don't exist, you shouldn't exist, you're making my life harder for existing and being who you are. And so I had to go back and actually do a lot of work in healing from that grief and that trauma of, like, being one of my biggest bullies and being one of my biggest critics and keeping so many parts of myself hidden. You know, and that goes for being queer and being trans as well, right? But to recognize that there was so much internalization of the outside voices telling me that I didn't belong or that there was something wrong or broken with me. And to have made that a part of my identity for so long just did so much harm to me. So you're right. I mean, in interacting with other autistic folks and part of our community, we're able to learn so much too about who we are, right? And rediscover a lot of parts of us that we've delegated to places that we don't want other people to see and that we don't even want to admit to ourselves is there.
Absolutely. It's, massively relate to all that. Literally everything you've been saying this entire time, I'm like, this is also me.
I'm glad.
But no, I absolutely get that. And for me, a lot of self-acceptance definitely started with getting my autism diagnosis. And I'm not even diagnosed that long, but I had been in therapy unsuccessfully, dropped out, and went back several times before I got diagnosed. And getting that acceptance and getting that working on, okay, there are reasons why I react this way, and I shouldn't be angry at myself for doing that. And there's reasons why I acted like that in the past, and I shouldn't be angry or relegating myself to the not allowed to exist or think about place in our head. And I guess one question we did get was that how do you think that your experience of being neurodiverse in academia or in grad school has differed from that of being a neurotypical person? Which is a hard question because neither of us are neurotypical, so we don't know what that's like.
Yeah, I mean, I think I can certainly point to the parallels, right? The stress, the anxiety, the the sense of isolation. A lot of those, I think, were exacerbated by my being neurodiverse, in the sense that, in some ways, I wanted to be in the lab on weekends by myself with all the lights off when it was rainy in Oxford, because that was my ideal. Like, low sensory input, I'm focusing on my task, I'm just doing experiments. And so in some ways, my being autistic made me the perfect, and by perfect, I say that heavily in quotes, because it's not really a healthy way of being within your career and the relationship to career, right? You can seek out those experiences outside of the work if that is what you so please, or within the work environment if that's what you so please. But I think for me, the biggest thing that came about is, and I don't know if you've come across this, but a lot of us have a really black and white sense of justice and injustice and what's right and what's wrong. And so I called it like I saw it. I saw classmates of mine getting abused and bullied and harassed, and I called it like I saw it. I went to the director of grad studies and I said, hey, there's a problem. We've got a bully in our department, and I don't give a shit if he's bringing in all the grants. He's screwing over all of my colleagues' lives, and they're brilliant scientists. And beyond that, they're amazing, incredible people who should not have to deal with, an emotionally stunted shell of a man who derives all of his worth from his publications, and who thinks he's like the best person in the world because no one's ever had the gall to stand up to him and tell him, you need to stop. It's not okay what you're doing. That got me into a lot of trouble.
I can imagine. Yeah, I can see how that would end in trouble. I have also definitely been in trouble. Mine is more so of overuse of the word bigotry, which, not technically not overuse, but in other people thinking
in
it's
other
overuse.
People's minds, right?
Yes. Yeah, but I think that is one of the reasons so many autistic people get into advocacy and that sort of thing, in that it's sometimes very hard to advocate for ourselves because we may not necessarily know or pick up on how we're feeling straight away it can depend on the situation and the, I guess, the way that we were raised. Sometimes we can be taught to ignore absolutely everything about ourselves, and it goes so much that we start to regulate our feelings and our discomfort to be not ever allowed to think about. But when we see other people facing injustice, we're like, no, this is unacceptable.
I
I've got to
become a
act on
mama
this
bear.
right now.
I say my mama bear claws come out. Yeah, and I think that was the thing, right? Is I had spent the entirety of my life people telling me that how I was experiencing the world wasn't true. And finally in grad school was coming to myself, had witnessed people, very close people to me, be in emotionally abusive relationships, had stored that as data, right? Knew what emotional abuse looked like. So when I saw it in the academy, no one was going to tell me otherwise, that's not what it was, right? I mean, I could give you the literature in terms of romantic relationships, and show you the same signs in a lot of mentor-mentee relationships. And in fact, I've said that to my supervisors before. I was like, you're a therapist. If someone just told you the same exact thing about their partner, you would be a bad therapist if you applauded them for persevering in the relationship, right? Like, obviously, you're not going to tell them what to do, but you would start to give them tools for them to recognize what is and isn't healthy in the relationship to their partner. Why are we not doing the same thing to people in their relationships to their careers in academia? And so I think for me, not having those social filters and really to some degree not having that like long-term, thinking about my own career in the future meant that I could at the NIH, stand up to Francis Collins in front of everyone in cameras and be like, yo, this thing you just did, we noticed, early career researchers noticed, and it's not cool. So explain yourself, when other people were like, who am I even allowed to say that because I'm working in government? I was like, screw that. I'm not gonna have my voice not say the things that I'm seeing and telling it like it is. And in a lot of ways, that's what got me into the work that I'm doing now. And like you said, I think a lot of fantastic efforts come from those of us who are non-normative in some way or don't fit in spaces, because we come into a culture and we're like, yo, you're super comfortable with this. This is not great. This is not healthy. Like, all of this, not okay. Let's do something about it, or I'm out, right? And I think that's the other unfortunate side, is I think people should feel empowered to leave academia if that is what they want, and that is where they want their lives and their careers to take them. But when we claim to be fostering, diversity and inclusion, and claim to be wanting to represent everyone, and then continue to perpetuate structures and systems that actively push people out because they push them to the brink of burnout, and mental distress and rock bottom, then we've got a problem. And then we need to talk about things, and then we need to start doing something about it. So anyway, I know I went off on a tangent there, but that I think that's why my experience in academia was so non-normative, so to speak, is because I am by default a non-normative person, right? Like, I'm queer, I'm trans, I'm bisexual, I'm autistic. You put all of those together. I was a creative writer within an academic space where everyone was expecting me to write very clinical and objective language. I was like, I want to make people enjoy the things that reading the things that I'm writing. So anyway, I could talk about this.
That was an important tangent, a very important tangent to say. I have 1,000,001 things that I'd like to ask you, but we are definitely out of time. So before we wrap things up, is there anything else you'd like to say?
No, I think, I sort of got on my soapbox and said what I needed to say. The last thing I will say is, I am on Twitter. My DMs are open. So is my email. I love, love, love. My favorite part of what I do is what you and I are doing now, is having a dialogue, supporting others, letting others know that their experiences are actually quite frequent in academia, and that it's not okay for them to be having those experiences. So if anyone at any point listening to this wants to reach out to me, wants to chat, wants to process, wants someone to listen to and validate their experiences and what they're feeling, I am more than happy to do so. So please, please, please reach out to me if that is something that you would like to do. I'll also plug Future of Research as a volunteer org. We do some pretty cool and awesome work. I'll plug PhD Balance. You guys are doing some pretty cool and awesome work. So if people want to get involved and volunteer, it's a great way to find community. It's a great way to foster some resilience and build some support networks as well. So it's a good way to put what would otherwise might feel like energies that sort of you keep hitting a wall against, because it's a tough system out there. There are some wonderful labs, there are some wonderful fields and careers out there within the academic system. They are rare. So just I'll say that last thing is you deserve to be discerning of the environment that you end up in, of the mentorship relationships that you create, and of the careers and spaces that you go into. Don't let anyone ever tell you otherwise, because you value, not just as a scientist, but as a human being. So I'll end with that. And with thanking you and Sue and the rest of the team, of course.
I think that's an amazing note to end on. You are an absolutely amazing person. Thank you so much for coming. For all of those watching or listening later on, this has been Grad Chat by PhD Balance. We are live every Saturday, 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific, or 8 p.m. British time, which is my time. And if you'd like to be a guest, there is a Google form in the description of this video. So thank you very much for watching, and we will see you next time. Bye.